Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Prepare for Impact, Best Practices in Rebate Management, Part 2, Process and Automating Data. My name is Brian Munson. I am the Business Development and .coop Sales Manager for NCBA CLUSA, and I'll be your moderator today on the webinar. Co-hosting today on the webinar is LBMX. Prepare for Impact, just for a little bit of background, is NCBA CLUSA's exclusive webinar series that will explore key issues that will shape our 2017 Co-op Impact Conference. Impact will be held October 4th through the 6th in Alexandria, Virginia. And given that rebate management is really an important part of every co-op's revenue stream and overall structure as a cooperative, we want to make sure that we examine the best practices in how to do that. Part 1 looked into Robinson-Patman and negotiation, and Part 2 will look at process and automating data and using that data, and how the co-op can access that more effectively. LBMX is a perfect actual co-presenter for this kind of topic. They're an associate member of NCBA CLUSA. They're a gold sponsor at this year's Impact Conference. And they are certainly a long-standing resource for purchasing co-ops. And our speaker today will provide some insight into this topic that I think everybody will appreciate. Before we begin, just very quickly, a quick bit of housekeeping. Participant phone lines are muted to reduce background noise. You will, of course, be able to pose questions, just not verbally. So if you do have a question, you can type it into the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. We'll collect those and answer them as time allows at the end of the program. NCBA CLUSA is recording this program, and it will be archived on our website. You will receive an email containing a link to the posted recording tomorrow, so be sure to listen again if you'd like. Share it with friends, colleagues, family, anyone that you think would benefit from learning more about this topic. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelist today. That's Robert Ward. He's the VP of Sales and Marketing at LBMX. And I'm going to let Robert just quickly introduce himself, and then we can kind of get to our agenda and walk through the rest of the program. Robert?
Thank you, Brian. I look forward to seeing you at the Impact Conference. So a little bit about who LBMX is. We're a technology company. We focus on purchasing groups, cooperatives, the members that belong to those cooperatives, and the suppliers that connect to those cooperatives. We are a solution provider that really wants to automate that whole supply chain so that we can provide real-time visibility of the information for the key stakeholders in that unique supply chain. So I think we'll start, Brian, right now. Let's just kind of move on to the agenda and kind of give you an idea of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what we see as a typical rebate processing model, what we're seeing out there in the marketplace. We're going to talk about what that ideal solution is, and it kind of scares some people, and that's okay. So because it's going to scare some people, there's always an alternative. What is the alternative if we can't get that ideal solution employed? And how does it work? We're going to talk about what are the keys to a successful project, because you can announce a project, but it's important to know what the keys are in order to make that project run. What's next? We'll give you kind of a case study of what one cooperative did, and kind of summarize a little more detail of who LBMX is. So from there, let's talk about what we see as a typical rebate processing model. So let's kind of jump to that first slide. And typical model is the member buys product directly from the supplier. They're going to either give them a call on the phone, they're going to fax an order in, they're going to email an order, but they order directly from the supplier. At the end of a quarter, so for the purchases, something purchased in January, at the end of the quarter, at the end of March, the supplier sends a report to the buying group. And that report, the group assembles that report, and if you can well imagine, 10 different suppliers will identify 10 different members by 10 different identifiers. So they have to assemble that information, and it takes a great deal of time. The member checks the information and issues a claim because the supplier said, hey, this is what a given member has reported, or we're reporting for a member, the member may disagree with that number for whatever reason. We'll talk about some of those reasons here in a second. The supplier reviews the claim and responds to the member. So that's what a typical model looks like. You know, by the time things are settled, you're halfway through the year for those purchases that happened in January. Kind of move on to talk about that next slide, and this is the issues we're seeing. On average, the vendor sends those reports 45 days after the end of the quarter. So again, for a purchase done in January, the group doesn't know what the purchases are for the group until midway through May. That's way too late. The group has no way to confirm the purchases are correct, so they have to rely on the member to do a lot of work. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a great deal of time assembling information. The suppliers are sending reports in all kinds of different formats, and they have all kinds of different identifiers for the members. So it's very hard to assemble the information and make sense of it. The revenue discrepancies, meaning if the member does issue a claim and then the supplier does agree, that's not dealt with until the second quarter. So the rebates that are owed for purchases in January sometimes aren't, the member doesn't get in it doesn't get in the member's hands until June and July. Okay? And if you think about comparing that to a large corporate competitor, it puts the independent that belongs to that cooperative at a disadvantage. And on top of it all, on top of all that, there's no visibility into what products are being purchased. What members of the cooperative are not buying the proper products? What products are perhaps can garner a higher rebate percentage? Because there's no visibility, there's absolutely no way to track that or even negotiate a specific deal. So let's talk about, move on to the next slide, and we'll see the issues of a typical, let's move back one, Brian. Back one more. I think we're done here. Let's move on to the next slide. I had one in my slide deck and it caused me a little confusion. So what is an ideal solution? An ideal solution, the holy grail, is every member is on this exact same system. All members order through the same system. Purchase orders are always written with the correct cost, so inventory is received correctly. You know, this is what a national chain looks like. Not viable for the cooperative world. The independent members that make up the cooperative, they have different affordability levels. They have different zones that they compete in. Some of them are in a different part of their business history, meaning, you know, some of them are newer to the industry. Some of them are looking to get out and perhaps move that business on to somebody else. So, and to ask all of those independent members to have the same operating procedures, it just simply is not going to happen. So let's take a look at the next slide here, Brian. So what are the alternatives? Use EDI as the backbone to process rebates. If we can use EDI as a backbone, we can provide real-time visibility into what the rebates are. Now, most organizations, when they talk about setting up EDI, they automatically think, well, let's start with the purchase order, but that's not what we're talking about. We want the purchase information, which is the payable invoice that the supplier sends to a member. Let's flip to that next slide, Brian. So how does it work? Instead of sending those invoices to the member, and suppliers will have different suppliers will have different ways of sending that invoice through to the member, but we want them to electronically send that invoice through the group. Have the supplier send a group location identifier so that a given member, every supplier identifies it by the same number. So now we can start to align some information together. And we want all of the information that affects the rebates. And this is all of the information that's typically printed on a paper invoice. What are the terms? Because sometimes terms affect the rebate. What are the purchase unit and the purchase price? Because that's what's used to calculate the rebate. What products are purchased? Are any line level discounts? And really what we're asking the group to do is take responsibility for delivering that invoice to the member. And with today's technology, that's very simple. And set up a number of groups, and that's actually a moot point with setting up this type of platform. Okay, I'll let you move on to the next slide, Brian. So what are the keys to a successful project? One of the key is make it a group-branded project. If we make it a group-branded project, as opposed to LBMX, the solution provider, the vendors are more likely to support it because they view the group as their customer. This is an initiative that the group is moving forward. They see the group is moving all of their independent members in the same direction from a technology standpoint that they're able to, that they recognize or they're utilizing with the large corporate chains. They will understand that it's going to take a little bit longer for them to get all of their members moving forward. The other key part is allow the vendor to participate in a fashion they feel comfortable. So we would recognize a number of groups who have tried to force the vendor to participate in a very rigid fashion. So meaning they force the sub-vendor to use a specific partner or force them to pay setup fees. And what we find is that this just slows the project, and it deviates from what the original goal is. The original goal is, let's get the purchases flowing through the group so we can calculate rebates in real time and provide a platform where we can negotiate better rebates. By putting these barriers of entry to the suppliers, it's going to delay the project and keep the group from getting to where they need to get to in order to be successful. However, we do notice that some successful groups are able to negotiate a technology rebate for bringing this type of automation to the supply chain. So that is out there, and I guess it's a question that the buyers from the group need to ask the suppliers to see if there's a funding available for this type of initiative. Okay, we'll move on to the next, and the other part is, how do we get the members to participate? Let's not force the members to integrate into their system and send purchase orders electronically. You'll get some members who want to do that, but it's important that we have all of the members' purchase activity. So it's electronic ordering is something you can encourage in the future, but it's not needed in order to be a successful project. We simply want the invoice information from the supplier. And with that, we're going to deliver it to the member in a fashion they feel comfortable with. Now, emailing invoices is suspect because of all of the spam-related stuff that seems to be happening in the world right now. So we give everybody a secure web document center where they can log in and retrieve their invoices, and it also gives them a historical view of what they have purchased in the past. So people are pretty used to doing that right now because most people are doing some type of online banking, and that's exactly what it looks like. And once we have all of this, so the supplier is sending in a fashion that they feel comfortable with, the members receiving the information that they feel comfortable with, really in the center, what we now have is a database of invoice data that has all of the information we need in order to calculate a rebate. Okay, we'll move to the next. So what's next? Now that the invoice information is in digital form, normalized it, we do a lot of things with it. Just from a purchase analysis standpoint, we can do year-over-year analysis by product, by member location, and by vendor. That in itself is quite valuable. So all the reporting can be also done in real time. So as a member is invoiced for something new, information is updated. So if you let's cycle back to what we're seeing out there in the marketplace, which is the group receiving purchase information 45 days after the end of the reporting period. The group really has no idea whether the market is booming or going down until it's way too long in the future. With what we're talking about is you can tell very early on how well your group is doing. You can tell in real time that your member, a member, has stopped buying through the group. You can tell that, hey, a given member, their sales are really taking off. So what type of support can the cooperative give them in order to be more successful? We'll move on to the next slide here. So what's next? So we talked about purchase information. If we have that purchase information, let's calculate those invoices. Let's calculate the rebates as invoices arrive. So as an invoice flows through it, you have the invoice, you know where it is and who it belongs to, who it came from. So it's very simple math calculation to calculate what's owed to the group. So what that also gives you, instead of waiting 45 days after the end of the reporting period, at the end of the reporting period, the very next day, you can print off a report and see what's owed to you, so you can go start to collect the money. On top of it, you also have what's your liability? How many dollars in rebates do you owe to the member, and what does that breakdown look like? For central bill groups, we have a lot of organizations who are self-assessing their rebates. They give a report to the supplier and say, hey, you figure it out. And they give a report to the member and say, hey, this is what you're being paid. And that happens the very first day right after the end of the reporting period. So if you think about the amount of time, and we talked about normalizing the data earlier because of all of the different location identifiers, the first day after the end of a reporting period, you can click a button and have collected money from the vendor and you paid money to the member. That simple. Let's move on to the next slide there, Brian. And let's give you an idea of what one cooperative did. So Timber Marts, they're in 850 building material locations across Canada, about $4 billion in retail sales. So good-sized organization. They came to us and they said, well, we're 200 locations, and we're in western part of the country, and we need to go national because of there's a corporate competitor that's entering the marketplace. And oh, by the way, we want to move to 800 locations with whom we don't want to add any staff. We also want to track rebates at the line item level because we know that our competitors are doing that. They're large corporate competitors. They also, wanted to know what members are not supporting the preferred programs because a bunch of independent members, it's like herding cats sometimes. Sometimes members fall off the rails and they need to identify who they are quickly so that they can keep them on track so that the preferred programs are supported. How do I get my rebate money to my members as quickly as possible? Instead of at the end of the quarter, they want to do it monthly because their members were under pressure from a large corporate entity entering the marketplace. And oh, by the way, let's do it all without adding any technical staff. So an interesting set of requirements for this particular project. Let's take a look at what we did. So first thing we did, we had all the vendors send EDI invoices, just like they do for their large corporate entities. So I guess in this particular case, we're thanking the national entities for preparing the suppliers to do this. We just kind of jumped on the bandwagon that they championed. We thought about receiving PDFs. They thought it would be easy, but what we found is scraping data meant employing a team to manage more exceptions. We wanted to set an environment where it was clean and seamless. And again, we're going to go back to the requirements. Let's not add any staff. We want to take the money that we want to really run a really low-cost head office, and we want to put the money back in our members' hands. And we found that service providers that forced the supplier to become a customer meant that its potential revenue for the group that was going to the service provider. Okay? It means the supplier had to make a decision. Instead of me giving that money to the group and putting the money back in my members' hands, I'm going to go pay the service provider. Web portals were okay for the smaller vendors, but we had to provide a program where for the large for the large number of invoices for those larger vendors, because those vendors are going to bulk at a web portal. So we had to provide a solution where the vendor could do what they're doing for their large corporate entities. If they have a small number of invoices, great, there's a free web portal that they can take advantage of. And oh, by the way, you don't need to pay LBMX anything. So it's a win-win-win all the way around. Take a look at the next set of steps. Implement a system that was flexible to manage document exceptions. And this is kind of critical. And they're very simple things. You know, first thing, we want to make sure that that invoice is compliant with government invoicing requirements. And they're different by country. I know in Canada, if it doesn't have a GST number on it, it's not a valid invoice, and as a result, the organization can't collect a GST credit. Supplier identifiers must be correct for downstream reporting. So has to have a consistent supplier number. So if a supplier number comes in that's not part of the system, not recognized, we need to know that. And the member identifiers must be correct, because we want to make sure that the proper member is receiving the proper amount of rebates. But just very simple checks in order to get the invoice where it needs to get and make sure that we have the information that we need. On to the third step. Implement a system that can classify products into rebate categories on the fly with minimal manual intervention. It makes deploying a solution easier with minimal ramp-up time. Minimal ongoing maintenance. And it provides the ability to automatically calculate the amount of rebate that is owed to the group and what is owed to the member. So the categorization of products is very, very important. And we do that in a number of very interesting ways. Let's take a look at the next slide there, Brian. So I guess to kind of talk upon that previous point a little bit more is, if we have a document coming in, and depending on the rebate negotiation, we will use a number of different methods for determining what category a product belongs to. Some suppliers are very simple, where they have everything's rebatable except freight. Then we just need to set an exception for freight. Some vendors, it's by the product line. We'll sometimes ask them to send the product line, or if it's in the product description, we can pick it out of the product description. So we'll use a number of very interesting, unique ways to classify that product so rebates can be calculated automatically. So what it also gives you, it gives a group a receivable list. So if we've classified those products and we've calculated the rebate, they can print off a report, and then they can start calling suppliers for collecting the money that's owed to them and ultimately owed to the member. It also gives you something to compare against in case there's questions that arise. So, you know, we have all of the invoice data, we have all the purchase information right down to the product. We've calculated a rebate, and if the supplier has issued a rebate that is different than what we were expecting, we have all the detail to be able to address that concern. And you also have a projected payable to the members, which is the budgeting side of things, as well as if the members are inquiring, they know what to expect towards the end of the year. We're good on this one. So what is the real benefit? The ultimate benefit is you have line item information in real time. Who is buying what, and when are they buying it? Who are not, and I guess equally as important, who's not buying those key products? If they are a key product for the most of the membership, identify those members that aren't buying those key products, and then have that conversation. They may not know about it. They may be buying a similar product outside the group at a much higher price point when you take the rebates into consideration. You also have the ability to see what your total spend is by product category. And then from there, do that year-over-year comparisons, right down to the item level if you so choose. So by item, by product category, by member or supplier. So if a given supplier is really taking off with the group, then what is that supplier doing so well? Or how are you helping that supplier be successful? And then that can enter into the rebate negotiation. We'll move on to the next slide. So what is the result of Timbermart? Over a 2-year span, they went from 700 supplier deals to 3,500. Yes, 3,500. Because they were able to negotiate rebates at the item or at the category level for the same number of vendors. So same number of vendors, they made the rebate deals more complex. But at the end of the day, the total rebate revenue was up. The total rebate percentages increased because they were able to negotiate and track rebates from the supplier where the margin on a given product category was higher. They started paying them out rebates monthly instead of quarterly. So now the money is in the members' hands quicker. And really the crux of it all is they stopped missing purchase plateaus. They knew how close they were to that next purchase level in real time. So in the building material industry, which is what this organization is in, when purchases are kind of slim in December, they can actually encourage a purchase because it makes sense, because they go to that next purchase level. Brian, we'll move on to the next slide. And just to kind of give you a summary of who LBMX is, kind of wrap it up. We're a technology company. Our focus are on purchase groups and purchasing cooperatives. And our strategy, we want that real-time data to be in the hands of the groups for a competitive advantage, and that is for rebate management, focus buying, and purchase and operational efficiency. That's why we're in business. That's what we provide the groups that are using our service.
Well, Robert, I appreciate you walking through all this, and we certainly appreciate you and LBMX being a resource for the purchasing co-op community. I want to open it up to some questions for anyone that's on the line, or I've got a few, if that's all right. I guess the first one was really like at the beginning of your presentation, I was just kind of looking at the typical rebate model, and I guess it's just more of a general question. Is the typical model so inherently inefficient because just technology has pushed the pace of business so fast and kind of what we expect, and the old way of doing rebates was at some point okay, and just most businesses either haven't caught up? Is it just a function of technology pushing business forward?
That's a great question. I think it's a number of factors. One is the systems that are in place today have been in place for 20 or 30 years, and they worked when technology wasn't a factor. And that was the general way business was operating back then. Technology has caught up or has come into play. Things are moving faster, and faster than most of us can even grasp. So I think it's a case where the organizations need to recognize that the technology is out there. They need to budget for that technology, which is also a big thing. These organizations run very lean, and I think they need to start to budget for technology so that they can utilize the information that's available to them.
Yeah. I mean, it just struck me as like, wow, that is buying something in January and then figuring out, what the rebate was in, May or June just seemed wholly crazy to me. But I mean, it's a fair point to what you're saying. I want to touch also on, the EDI kind of piece that you went through, and I think you did touch on how this can be sort of a part of the negotiation when members or the co-op at least is working with vendors and suppliers. Can you talk to me more about how the co-op would approach their vendors or their suppliers when they're thinking about implementing a system like this? Like, what are some of the things that they need to keep in mind when they're saying, hey, we're going to start using EDI, we want to get more efficient, we need you guys to get on board? What are sort of some of the things that they would need to be telling their vendors and suppliers that say, hey, this is the deal?
Yeah, and it's I think there's a number of different conversations that they need to have. One is they have some members who perhaps aren't interested in moving forward with technology, and that's okay. They're going to have some early adopting members, and I think they need to utilize those early adopting members. And I start there because it's ultimately giving the supplier what they really, really want. The supplier is under pressure on their order desk. They have faxed orders coming in. People have to enter that stuff. Stuff's getting entered wrong. Stuff then gets shipped wrong. It's very expensive for the supply chain. Ultimately, what the supplier wants is the purchase order. But you can't start there because the project will fail. So you need to start, but you need to tell the whole story of where you're going from a technology initiative. And the successful groups are able to paint a really good picture. Some of these groups, really haven't employed technology at a group level or group strategy level ever. So I think it's a case where you need to paint that picture for the future, which is, hey, the supplier, we have this initiative. We have to bring on all of our members along to this initiative. It's going to be really expensive. We do need some assistance because it will ultimately benefit you. Phase one is let's get that invoice data flowing. Okay, we got this invoice data flowing. Now let's go back and talk about how we can make the supplier more efficient by getting that purchase order information. And then once we get the purchase order information flowing, I'm sure there'll be a third or a fourth or fifth in technology initiative, which is exactly what the Amazons are doing. They had a technology initiative 5 years ago, and they keep building on, and they keep asking for more, and they keep improving. So it's about painting the picture of where the group wants to go in the future.
Got it. I think that's some good insight. And like you said, oftentimes it will go back to budget, and it goes back to member engagement. Member engagement is certainly something that we have talked about in this webinar series. We actually had the veterinary co-op talk about all the innovative things that they were doing specifically to engage members. And we've also talked to Gary Pittsford and Allison Lingane from Castle Wealth Advisors and Project Equity on succession planning. So that's one thing. I want to use that sort of the topics that we've talked about and bring it to business intelligence. We had a couple webinars on that, and we have a third one coming up soon with actually your colleague, Steve Segan, and also two other folks. Looking at the data and sort of, you mentioned like year over year, you can look at products and, however they want to compare. Can data sometimes mislead people? You're talking about real-time data and all the numbers coming in. My question is really, can data sometimes mislead people, and how important is it for them to actually understand what they're looking at when all this sort of deluge of information comes to them? Because I think that, they can have all the systems in place, but if they can't understand them or they don't know how to use it effectively, that business intelligence, if you will, then, that could be just as disastrous as not doing something.
Yeah, we recognized that very early on when we started our company. Like in the beginning, we have a tremendous amount of granular data, and for us to show it to the group, you could just see everybody look at it and say, "Oh, that's really good information," and their eyes would glaze over because it wasn't packaged in a way that they could really grasp onto it. And that's one of the reasons why we went back to our product set and developed our C-suite analytics product, so that the information is displayed in a fashion that that makes sense to them and they're able to take action on. So it's important that it's critical that all of that information, because it can be very, very overwhelming, but so it's critical that the information is in a fashion that they can immediately look at and say, you know what, I know the action I need to take place here. I know what I need to target. I know what I need to do, versus dumping them with everything.
Right. Well, and that kind of leads into my fourth question, which is the culture of reliability that you mentioned. You know, how difficult is building that culture of reliability? But what can that do for the organization? I mean, I think, you know, Timber Mart, you were hitting on it in such a way. You know, did they really find that it was difficult to do that? You know, between them at the co-op and trying to get, you know, learning how to use the data like we just talked about, but also the member, you know, getting them, you know, into that process. I mean, that's got to be, you know, a 6 to 12 month initiative in terms of training and getting people on board, the early adopters to the stragglers at the tail end. I mean, that in itself that's not a technology thing. That's like an HR thing. Like how do you guys, or how have you seen that managed along the way?
Yeah, the technology is easy. You need champions. So right off the bat, we try to get the member champions and the supplier champions, so that we can put a model in place that that people can follow. You know, so as a result, you know, if we have a good pilot, or you know, a good target bunch of members to move forward with, then there's going to be a ton of people who will follow those leaders and those early adopters. And at the end of the day, the ones straggling at the end simply don't want to be left out, because it's easy, you know, and we're not asking them to really change how they do business. And those members are in business and they're very, very successful, and they have, who are we to tell them that they're running their business wrong, you know, essentially. So it's important that you support them, but you show them that there's a different path that they can follow, and that it's, oh, you know, it's not that much of a change.
Sure. Just waiting to see if there's any other questions that will come in. You know, I guess my last question to you is more, you know, I think it was Timber Mart that said, you know, we want to do all this without having to hire additional sort of technical people. When you get so efficient in terms of going from 700 suppliers to 3,500 or whatever the figure was, did they end up having to hire more people just to manage the data and some of the programs? Like, was that and I don't say that in a bad way. It's, you know, because hiring more people is a good thing, because that means you're growing, and that means you can make, you know, from the co-op standpoint, a greater impact in your community. You've got more jobs available. You know, so it's like almost getting more efficient, you know, can create jobs, that kind of thing. So I'm just wondering, like, what, you know, it wasn't really touched on, but what was sort of the outcomes with that in terms of job creation and managing, you know, their growth?
Well, I think that's a very good question. From a technology standpoint, to continue to maintain the system and to be able to bring on more vendors and maintain the vendors that are on the system at this point in time, they have not employed more staff, I think. But wow, you know, at the end of the day, if you have 200 members and you're growing to 800 members, and you're adding new initiatives all the time that are not technology related, they very well could not be technology related. They could be, great example would be if you want to roll out a national banner. It's not necessarily a technology initiative. It's a, you know, here's a marketing initiative. They have employed more resources in that area, and that does make sense. And that just shows that, hey, you know, this group is moving forward to meet the challenges of their competitors. Just one slice of it is technology. The other slice, you know, we need a national brand.
Yep, I think it's really interesting. I mean, and that's, you know, technology is expensive, and, you know, so are people. But you want to have a good blend of that, and you want to be efficient in most areas, because that helps you grow, and that helps you hire more people. And one of the things that we're looking at the Impact Conference is the economic impact of co-ops in communities. And I think that that's some of the data that they'll get to is when co-ops are operating in this way, they can support this many jobs. And so I'm excited to see that. We've got a council of co-op economists that's going to dig into some of that. So anyways, a lot of good stuff here, Robert, and I appreciate you for leading us through this today. I'm not seeing any other questions that are coming in, so I think we can wrap this up. If you've got anything else, sort of in closing, I'll leave you the floor. But otherwise, I can wrap it up here. Anything else to close with?
I think I'm good. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate.
You got it. For anybody that is looking for more information on the Impact Conference or purchasing cooperatives, you can always feel free to email me at bmunson@ncba.coop. I would encourage everybody to subscribe to our Co-op Weekly e-newsletter. That's going to have all the information on these webinars through up to the conference, and of course all the conference information. Again, Impact is October 4th through the 6th in Alexandria, Virginia, the Washington, D.C. metro area. It's been my pleasure to work with you, Robert, today, and to all those listening, we appreciate your attention. We'll get this recording out to you, and please reach out to us. And LBMX puts on a great event in June of every year. I think they're going to be in San Diego next year for Accelerate. That's their event that they do for purchasing co-ops and buying groups. So I would encourage everybody to research that as well. Robert, I will talk to you soon, and thanks again for today, sir.